Mary Beth.
Hi, Janice, thank you. And can I ask you to monitor the chat as we go? Great. So hi, everybody. I'm Mary Beth Lakin. I'm the Director for Credit for Prior Learning Assessment, or CPlan. And this is a network, in case you don't know it, that is a Minnesota State collaborative. And it serves all 30 colleges and 7 universities in implementing and sustaining CPL, or Credit for Prior Learning, policy and practice. And we'll get more into what Credit for Prior Learning is and what your role may be, or you may like to learn more about. As I mentioned to Janice, we want you to put your questions and your comments in chat. So we've got a relatively small group. It would be great if through chat you could say who you are and what campus, if you're on a campus, or if you're not, you know, what organization. That would be terrific to see if you can just do that really quickly. So if you're faculty, what particular program, and then the college. So just chat away right now so we can see who's on. And then Janice, if you can take a look and let me know who's joining us, who's participating, that would be great.
Yeah, so Melissa from College of Business in Mankato State. Avani is math. And we've got around 18 folks. Let's see here. Julie is from, oh, we got a public school, Minneapolis Public School facilitator for them, district programmer. Jim is a computer science faculty member. Julie's from Metro State. Let's see here, who else we got down there? Bemidji State's in.
Great.
Ed Tech Consulting for Metro. Senior Workforce Center Development Manager at Goodwill Easter Seals and employee training. That's a wonderful person on board. Moorhead, MSU Moorhead's in here. Anoka Tech is in here from Health Informatics or Information Technology, and Dakota County Tech College. So a nice variety of folks.
So now that you've done that and you've introduced yourself, thank you very much. So Credit for Prior Learning. So I'd like to gauge kind of where the group is. So why don't you put just one word in for CPL, or Credit for Prior Learning, what you think it is, what you think about it, what you don't know about it. It can be a feeling, impression, another word that defines it for you. So just do that really quickly and we'll kind of see where you're at with that. Because usually with webinars, just like in classrooms, some people are just dipping into the subject area. Some people have a little experience. Some people are what I call frequent flyers. They've been doing a lot of work with this and want to do even more. So let's see, where are we, Janice? With
we got we have transfer, we have experience, seasoned, novice, engagement, value, valuable, adults, lifetime experience recognized by institution, another engagement. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah, that's great. So that tells me people have been thinking about this and want to think more about it. So what I want to do today, and people can feel free to jump in and add questions and along the way, let's keep this informal. But I think in thinking about Credit for Prior Learning, it's good not only to think about what it is and what the trends are, but what's the landscape today for us, and why is Credit for Prior Learning so important. So there's a group called Strata Education Network that has been doing some public surveys to get viewpoints of adults. They've probably over the past year since COVID-19 started, or we saw it in our country, they have interviewed from the get-go, or surveyed from the get-go, over 25,000 adults from 18 and over. To get a sense of how they were feeling about life, work, education, and training. So I wanted to share a little bit of that with you because I think it's really connects with Credit for Prior Learning. There's also some Credit for Prior Learning research that's just come out that I think really speaks to equity and SIM. we will, just to let you know a little bit more of what we'll talk about what Minnesota State has in terms of policies. And then we'll talk about CPlan and the role and how we support campuses and faculty and other CPL stakeholders. So take a look at this. This data is probably not too surprising to any of us, but it demonstrates what we really need to pay attention to. And in the 25,000 or more adults that Strata surveyed, they found that 52% had lost jobs, hours, or income. 63% are worried about losing their jobs, and 33% believe they need more training that would help them replace their job. Now, one of the things they wanted to look at, and they looked at more recently, is, and we hear a lot about this now, especially since the pandemic, what's the value of higher education? What's the value of a degree? So they were really trying to get at perceived benefits. So particularly with people that had lost jobs or were concerned about losing jobs and felt like they needed more training or education. So you can look at the comparison between 2019 and 2020 about additional education will be worth the cost. And then you can look at the also the difference with 2019 and 2020 in terms of how that's going to help me as a job candidate or help me with an employer to get another job. So this is important stuff to think about in terms of where people's minds are as far as education. And we know right now with looking at enrollment that people who already have more education are more likely to go back and get more education, and they're more set up to be able to do that. And people who have less education, less opportunities for that, or maybe in lower wage jobs, essential workers, they're less likely to go. And so you all have probably seen this on your own campuses in terms of enrollment over the past year, who's able to come and for what. So this is important information in thinking about how adults are looking at education and how education could work for them in this time and beyond. And one thing they really tried to get at was preferred education options in this Strata Education Network. And so you can see, I hope, and I've given you a link to go back and look at it more, but you can see out of the respondents that 63% were looking at skills training and non-degree credentials, because they were looking at it as the fastest path for getting into a job, or moving up in their job, or gaining more security in the workplace at this point. So that's something to think about in terms of, here's this non-credit stuff that people are doing. Might that translate into credit for prior learning and be a pathway and something that appeals to adults to kind of step in and come back to school? And the thing that really hit me too, and it's not really surprise, I don't think, to any of us, but we're always looking at what are the challenges for people going to school, particularly adult learners coming back. And so we know that typical things are time, logistics, cost, technology. But the one thing that jumped out at me, and I think is really connected with credit for prior learning and the benefits for that, is that you look at that 49% self-doubt. As an adult learner, I'm not sure I can do it. I'm not sure I'm college material. I'm not sure I'm up to it. I feel like, I'm doing fine on my job, but put me in a classroom, I feel like, I don't belong here, and I'm an imposter. So that's a big, big thing to really think about in terms of encouraging people to come back to school, and how might that credit for prior learning boost them or give them confidence. So if there are any, I'll encourage people just to put things in the chat in terms of this Strata public viewpoint surveys. Are there things that jump out to you that connect back to what some of the things you were saying about in terms of credit for prior learning and benefits? So if you want to put anything in the chat, feel free to do that. Or you can feel free to unmute too if you want to do that too. If you're especially, outgoing and want to share a thought, you can do that. This is informal. I'll pause for a minute before I go on. Any thoughts about, yeah. Was it, sounded like somebody unmuted.
Yeah, so who's got, open up your mute and go ahead and ask questions if you have anything.
So no thoughts at this point. So if you want to, please, put something in the chat as we move along. Oh, it looks like somebody's put something in the chat. Anything, Janice, we should pay attention to right now?
We got it's Christy Allison. My own story is that I waited to go to college and CPL encouraged me to start. And from Cassandra, why did the perceived value of education decrease during the pandemic?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And I think that was already kind of a trend anyway. And I think maybe the pandemic accelerated that, because I think there's been a lot of discussion in public about education, whether it's a public good or a private benefit. And we've moved over the years, for some of you that have been in education for a while, you've seen this, how we've moved over the years in de-investment from, say, the state or from the federal government. And so I think that's part of it. And I also think probably the other part is that particularly adults who are in the workplace and maybe haven't had a whole lot of higher ed experience, they're not sure how to navigate. They're not sure what it's all about. They don't know how long it takes. They don't know how much it costs. And sometimes it seems daunting to them. So they're looking for something that makes more sense to them, particularly at this time, that's shorter term, is more concrete. So that skills training or that non-credit training that we saw earlier, that were their preferences right now, that's something that they can relate to. That seems really concrete to them. Does anybody else have other ideas about why that would have gone down so dramatically? Other comments, or Janice, that we should?
Yeah, let's see, I've got, yeah, she was just wondering how she was reading the slides as well. I really do like the comment of from Christy as well. My own story is that I waited to go to college and CPL encouraged me to start. And I think that's a true testament to what we're trying to do here. Jolene said the difference between 2019, 2020 regarding education is interesting. And also Julie said our procedures have to be simple for students. Students don't need to understand all the structure and detail about CPL. If it is complex and confusing to get prior learning, especially for students, they will have self-doubt. And I guess that's right as well. And then the focus is on life essentials, not the perception of education as enrichment.
Right. Good. Good. All good. So the next one I wanted to make people aware of is the connected research that I told you about that really feeds into, strategic enrollment management, confidence, people being able to persist and complete. So this is a study that was just completed in October of 2020. It was done by the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, or CAL, and also WICHE. Was a co-sponsor and a partner, Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education. And this was a follow-up to a study that CAL did 10 years ago. This is a much larger study. It's 72 institutions. It's over 230,000 students. And what's really interesting is in the follow-up in terms of persistence and completion and the benefits to different student groups. So you may not be able to see this really well, but I gave you a link to this particular fact sheet, but then also to all the different studies and then the briefs that they've done for different stakeholder groups. So I think, you know, again, some of the things that are significant is that the boost in credential completion. So if you look at 49% compared to 27% for adults completing with PLA or credit for prior learning as opposed to those without it. If you look at the potential to close the equity gaps and look at different groups, you see a significant increase for Hispanic adults, for Pell Grant recipients, for Black students, and then also adults in community colleges. The thing that you also see is that people save time and they save money. So typically students are going to save 12 to 15 or do 12 to 15 credits through credit for prior learning. They're going to save 9 to 14 months. They're going to save anywhere from $1,500 to $10,000. And the big thing that people always worry about on campus, we worry about on campus is what does this do in terms of enrollment? So one of the things this study found is that students who have credit for prior learning opportunities are more likely to complete than others, and therefore more likely to complete more credits. Around an average, you see the average of 17.6 credit hours. So that's great. That's 17.6 more credit hours per average per CPL student over that student's you know, academic time or history or time in the classroom or at a campus. There are some challenges there though, even with the good news. If you look and you see, there's only 11% of adult students that are taking advantage of this. This has a lot to do with awareness. They don't know about it. They often don't hear about it in time. A lot of times they hear about it through word of mouth. And so it really speaks to us to figure out some strategies for raising awareness. And the groups that benefit most from this are the groups that benefit least. So if you look back at some of the significant increases among different groups, the Pell Grants students, for example, and Black students are less likely than other student groups to use this. So again, that's tied with awareness and particular kinds of outreach. So in working with credit for prior learning, we have to think about who we're serving and how we're serving them. What are the options and how do they find out about those options? So I think those are some of the things that really stand out for me, just in terms of this motivates, it boosts confidence for students when they come back because they say, I've got something and I can move ahead and I can complete. And yet we know we've got miles to go in terms of how students find out about this, how we work with different groups in equitable ways so that everybody can take advantage of this. So moving on to the next one. So I bet everybody, it sounds like this group knows credit for prior learning pretty well. I wanted to give you or at least an overview and a definition of it and a link to Minnesota State Board policy. So we know that we're looking at academic credit and we're looking at it awarded for what's been demonstrated either technical or college or university level credit. So it could be multiple learning experiences. So one that Minn State knows very well is military credit or credit for military occupational experiences and training. So that might be workplace or it might be community-based. It could be credit for prior learning could be based on a program, you know, like a military program or a certification or a national exam. Or it could be more individualized. You've learned it on the job. So, so you're really having to assess that individual learning. Excuse me, I'm getting hoarse. Okay, so just wanted to make sure we had this definition and you had the link for policies and practices at Minnesota State. And Minnesota State has two different kinds of assessments, internal, what we call internal and external assessments. External assessments act like transferring credit. So some of the things I mentioned earlier, military training or military occupations, those are programs. And so what a faculty member, and faculty are key to this, what faculty are doing with looking at programs through external assessments are evaluating that program and looking to see, is there college level credit here? Does this apply to my program? And so that assessment sets it up. Once that's approved, that can act by faculty and through a program, that can act as transfer credit. If I come in with a kind of military training or a CLEP exam or industry certification that you've looked at and you've reviewed and evaluated, or you've looked at American Council on Education, which is a third-party organization which reviews military and corporate training, you say, oh, okay, this aligns with my program. You've done kind of a program review. You've looked at the outcomes that aligns with courses or competencies in your program. And anybody who has this and has the transcript to prove it can come in. And with that, there's no additional assessment that needs to be done. So again, it can meet any kind of the requirements at Minnesota State. And you see some of those listed there in general technical electives. It can be at the undergraduate level, technical level, or graduate level. Internal assessments, those are things that I've learned in my job, in self-study, in the workplace, military, and perhaps they haven't been validated by anybody else. So again, faculty's key to this. You've got to look at not only the content of what they've learned, but you've got to figure out the option. What's the best way of assessing this student? And figuring out if they have all the competencies that are required in this particular course or to meet some program competencies. So there are a lot of students, we run into a lot of students that have informal learning experiences. Again, hasn't been validated by a third party. And so those are going to be more individualized kinds of assessments, and the faculty role is really important there. So I wanted to give you a list. Take a look at these. Think a bit about what I've just said about credit for prior learning. Here are some of the different options the faculty and students can look at together in thinking about how to assess learning that takes place outside the college classroom. So you've got those standardized exams like advanced placement, CLEP, DSST, International Baccalaureate. You've got college exams or credit by exam. So maybe you're a faculty member and you've created those for particular courses in your department because you think, okay, this kind of a challenge exam, this is going to work. This is going to help me know what the student is able to do and knows. And then with, as I mentioned earlier, with the individualized assessments, you might use that challenge exam as an individualized assessment, but you also might use portfolio. You might use a demonstration or an interview, or you could combine several methods to decide what might work best. And so sometimes you're going to use that because you might see somebody come in with continuing education courses or customized training courses where there hasn't been any kind of assessment. So that might be a record of something that they've done, but you need to add some sort of assessment to know that they really have the competencies. A lot of times what you'll see from the workplace or a certificate or military training, there might be 2 out of 3 of the competencies that are demonstrated by that particular kind of training. But you may feel there's one really important competency that training doesn't illustrate. And so you might do some kind of hybrid method there where you create another module for that student to test out or an interview or something like that. So you've got kind of an external, internal combination. And so I think the thing to remember with external is that's already been validated. either by you or by you as a faculty member, or by you and an external group like ACE, and you've kind of aligned with what they've already validated. And so that can come in through transfer. And then with internal, that's definitely more individualized. You're not only looking at the content, but you're looking at what's the best way to tell? How can this student demonstrate this? And I feel confident that they can get credit for this and then move on to the next course. So I'm really curious, and I see that there's some questions, but I'm also really curious about who's using what at campuses. What do you like to use and why, or what do you have questions or challenges about?
So Mary, we have Cassandra, who, in my experience working with adults who have done workforce training, there's a huge variation in faculty willingness to value the prior learning. And going through a third party or standardized assessment is very daunting for many students. And it's easier to just avoid the process as a whole. So plus the entire cost of the external validations can be a barrier for potential students.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially with those industry certifications. And so if that's not something that a student is getting through the workplace or through the military year, you're right, that's really tough. If this is something that's part of their workplace experience, they're not, and they're getting that through the workplace in terms of, formal training or certifications, then that takes away the expense. And then you can recognize that and not charge them anymore, because that acts as transfer credit, just like ACE credit recommendations for military, that comes in as transfer, no additional cost for that. And I think, to your point, Cassandra, on the internal assessments, that's something to think about too in terms of CPL fees. It's another equity issue as we look at questions about policy and procedure with CPL. What includes students, what leaves them out, and cost can certainly be one of those things. I think about CLEP exams. That sounds like it's not much, but it's not covered by financial aid. So that's a lot to have to pay out of pocket for an exam. So one of the things I keep thinking about and different groups are working on and is how that can be financed. I think financial aid at the state and federal level have to look at that, as well as employers. Employers benefit from students doing credit for prior learning too, because if they're doing tuition reimbursement, they're not going to pay as much for a CLEP exam as they would for a course. So I think that's a great thing to bring up. That's a barrier, and that's has to be front and center of what we think about. Any other?
Yep, got one more from Mark Wilson. How are faculty compensated for the interview or portfolio assessments? If faculty aren't happy, they won't support these non-traditional students.
Oh yeah, that's right. So there is a system set up through faculty contracts, faculty unions for community for the community college, or for the colleges and for the universities. So there is a stipend for those paid for those individualized assessments. And I can send a link or add a link to this that shows you what that is. I'm blanking right now on what the exact amount is, but I'm thinking that it's $75 a credit hour. But don't quote me on that. Let me find that link, and it may differ, according to college or university. So I'll find that and send that link out. But that's a really good question, and I think that a really good point. And I think that builds into some of what we're going to talk about a little bit later, in terms of looking at credit for prior learning, not as something over there on the side, but it's part and parcel of curriculum. It's part and parcel of teaching, learning, and assessment. And so one of the things CPlan is doing is working and collaborating with other groups and faculty to try to build a structure that really invests in faculty doing this, recognizes and rewards. So I think that's a very, very good point. It has to be part of the work that you do. There has to be the support for it, and compensation is part of that support. So thank you for asking that question. Any
And
other?
yeah, Bonnie came back and said, yes, $75 a credit for faculty, and the cost is $50 per credit for students.
Yeah. And again, there's something to think, there's fees to think about for students and what they can afford. So there's always something on my mind, to balance is how do we compensate faculty for this? And then how do we make sure that students are able to participate in these opportunities and that cost is not a barrier? All right. So a little bit really quickly about trends that I wanted to have you think about. So we use words like credit for prior learning assessment. One of the trends is really just to think about the language that we use, and it really is in general recognition of learning. And I like that we're moving toward this because I think it gives us a broader view of what credit for prior learning is in terms of, or just recognition of learning in general, looking at past, present, and future learning. And then looking at this kind of learning across the lifespan, because we're really not just talking about a 35-year-old. We're also talking about an 18-year-old that did dual credit or did an apprenticeship program or took some CLEP exams. And it's all under that big umbrella. It's just recognizing what typically doesn't happen in a college classroom, but it happens in other ways. So we're talking about, I like to say 18 to 80. So I think this recognition of learning helps us think more broadly about the learners themselves, the kind of learning that they bring. Navigation tools, I mean, that's a really big thing. I talked earlier about how students have a hard time finding out about this. And people on campuses, working on campuses, don't always know about this either. So it's what it is and how to navigate. Language is part of it. You see some initiatives that work in this area like Minnesota Reconnect, where you're really looking at advisors as navigators, and part of the knowledge that they have is credit for prior learning. You're also looking at credit for prior learning web platforms that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that help students navigate through the CPL process. So there's a whole move toward making it easier for people to navigate these kinds of programs. And then of course, what we talked about earlier was a focus on equity and inclusion. And I think we've already raised some challenges we have to face in terms of how groups are served, different groups within and outside of Minnesota State in terms of, potential and current students, the costs we just talked about. Also, I think the credit for prior learning options, the more options we have, the more likely we're able to recognize different kinds of learner and learning. So if we're really set on that third-party validation, that's the way we're going, with CLEP exams, that's going to leave out a lot of folks. As I mentioned with the informal learning, there's also, and we all know this, credit for prior learning does not fit neatly into to curriculum, to college curriculum. So, and we can't force it. So we have to look at ways to, while we're examining the training, we're also examining our curriculum, and we're seeing what's aligned, what are the gaps. And I think sometimes and I've been faculty in early childhood and human development and adult learning. I think some of these, me looking outside my own classroom and looked at what's going on in the community and in the workplace, has also encouraged me to look at my own curriculum, to look at my own profession, and look at where are the things that I need to adjust or think about, or where is the profession itself adjusting or thinking about. what the competencies are, what this means in terms of profession. And boy, I really think what's going on with the pandemic these days, it really has an impact on different professions, different careers, how people operate in the workplace, what kinds of skills that they need in terms of, sometimes it's called soft skills, but those are power skills, right? And a big one right now, I would think, would be resilience. So how do you look at that at a college level in terms of a profession, say resilience in the healthcare field? And how could that be assessed and be included as a competency within the curriculum? So that's one thing to think about. Near completer movements, those are all over the country, and including in Minnesota. One that I really like, Finish Line, is University of Memphis, where they can come back and take credits through online vendors that have free open education resources like Sailor Academy. And some of those have been evaluated by ACE, so they're able to plug those into a degree program and help them finish. And the other one I wanted to talk about really quickly is incremental credentialing, or credential as you go. Who's heard of that term, incremental credentialing? And if you haven't, have you done work with stackable credentials? Any thoughts about the stackable credentials or incremental credentialing or credential as you go? Thoughts or questions? I want to talk a little bit about that.
Is it like micro credentialing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Credential as you go is a Lumina funded grant right now, just finished up, and it really was examining different ways throughout the country, different systems of acknowledging, again, recognition of learning. And so that could be micro-credentials, it could be certifications, apprenticeship programs, internships, badges, that kind of thing. So it has a stackable credential in mind, where you're going, maybe you start out with a micro-credential, you move to a certificate, you go to associate, you go to bachelor's, graduate, whatever. But it's also looking at kind of like different on-ramps and how you build. You might not start at the same place, and you might not necessarily just be going one way. You might be going back and then coming back, moving forward. So a lot of it is connected with what you're talking about with the micro-credentialing, but also with stackable credentials. You're doing steps, you're building as you go. You're picking up additional credentials to increase depth and breadth of learning and then employability. The thing that I like about this initiative, and I will there will be additional links with research reports, is it's really talking about the timing. There's one concept that folks are working with called auto award as you go. So you automatically awarded credentials and degrees as you meet criteria. So it's really kind of interesting when you think about kind of the timing of when your learning is recognized. If you have to wait about all the way until you finish a 4-year degree to have some credential to hand somebody to say, I've got it, that's really challenging for people in today's world, especially with all the stresses and strains of the workplace and the workforce. So I think this credential as you go is giving folks a way to recognize what you've learned, and then be able to show that to an employer, to a college. So you can also look at it in terms of the place too. So you can look at it like Minnesota State and look at how that works across colleges and universities. You could also look at it in terms of an employer-college agreement or employer-university agreement, where you're looking at how do how are your credentials recognized in the different settings. So I like the concept. I think it builds on earlier things we're familiar with, like stackable credentials, but I like the idea of really paying attention to when people can have something, be awarded something to show that, yes, I know something, I can be employed here. So I think that'd be really, really valuable. And I encourage you to look at the link. There are also a couple of webinars that the project has just completed. So it would be really interesting for you to take a look at that and think about your own programs and what you may already be doing or want to do with that. So any comments that I've missed so far, Janice?
Yeah, we had one from Julie said, I think a challenge with this, as we see with transfer pathways, is that these models are linear and our students never follow a linear path in their learning journey.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And I think when I look at that, then maybe it's less of me fitting that, but the model fitting some of the things in that I've learned. Right. So just really quickly before we move on to the next thing, as you're with all the things that we've talked about, why don't you put in chat, I talked about frequent flyers. Why don't you put in chat where you really quickly, where you think your campus is with CPL from your perspective, or where you'd like it to be, or if you think you're, and you can just use a term or a quick description. You can talk about stuck or wanting to expand or trying to learn or, not there yet or focused on faculty, whatever your first thought about where your campus is, if you're representing a campus today, or even your immediate program. And you can
Nothing yet. So does anybody have any comments on it?
You can unmute or you can add comments as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, they've identified opportunities for CPL through advising with students. We learn their work in the healthcare industry and how it applies to it. So they feel the program's going pretty well. That was Jody. Have a procedure, but it seems a little bit cumbersome. It is my understanding that state level policy is being revised.
Any others, Julie?
That was Bonnie. So no, that's all we've got.
Okay, those are good. Thank you for that. And there definitely are some procedures that are being worked on. And I'll mention some of the task force. One of the things I just wanted to mention really quickly in terms of thinking about where your campus or program is to really look at CPL perceptions that people can sometimes have about diluting program quality, or if it didn't happen here, it didn't happen, or somebody on my campus is not going to let me do it or going to be opposed to it, whether it's dean, faculty registrar, or whatever. And so a lot of this is really working through with campuses about where and how and when learning and evaluation take place. And then really figuring out on your own campus who the CPL stakeholders are, who are the decision makers, because it's not always the same on every campus. And then kind of getting together with the movers and the shakers, bringing a few skeptics along to figure out how this can work for your campus or how you can move it to the next level. And so there's a whole, what I call AAA awareness acceptance application. So it's, how do you make people more aware? We're looking back at some of the earlier research and the benefits and exactly what it is, and that, and how it benefits, all the stakeholders, including the campus and faculty and students and employers, and all of that. And then really doing, through that awareness, helping people to accept and then to be able to apply that. You mentioned some different things that you're doing on your campuses, maybe that you already have in place. So what's that, if you're looking to expand, what are the success stories and where are the new opportunities? And so, again, I mentioned that, and again, I think this is part of making the case that CPL is central to Equity 2030 and SIM goals. So one of the things CPlan is doing is working and collaborating with others throughout the system to look at things like transfer pathways, guided pathways, uh, in terms of equity and how students are served through credit for prior learning, and how credit for prior learning plays into the pathways that we create throughout systems and programs. And then I think it's really important, as Janice mentioned earlier, to look at those CPL connections. Again, that's going to help us bring up the awareness. So obviously with the colleges and universities, there are connections with CPlan as supporting CPL, the Veterans Education Transfer System. We already have a great system put into place for recognizing military training and occupations. How do we build on that? How do we build on what's already going on there, but then expand into different environments like the workplace and community-based organizations? Centers of excellence, that's where a lot of validated learning is linked, some of those industry certifications. And then we've got an All Learning Counts Lumina project, and I mentioned earlier Minnesota Reconnect. So I think there are things going on the campus across Minnesota State that connect CPL and give us opportunities to learn more about where we can dig into some related initiatives or create our own initiatives. And again, this is kind of where CPlan gets into, we're really looking at that policy and practice and procedure. And then we're looking at how can we help campuses implement this? What kind of support? How can we help you build capacity? So there, I have found before I was at Minnesota State with CPlan, I was at ACE for 15 years, and I was really fortunate enough to be part of research to look at CPL implementation, where we looked at that across different campuses in the United States, and we focused on the student navigation piece, the faculty engagement piece, and that infrastructure development, from how do you communicate, to what the procedures are, to how you document, to coding and transcripting and collect data and analyze that and do evaluation. So, so I learned some things that I think are really helpful in thinking about Minn State and the campuses and CPlan and how we might work on those areas, because it's really tough to do, as you know, to do this work on your own and try to figure it out on your own. Like, what is it? Okay, here's a new CPL coding procedure here, or transcript procedure. I'm supposed to do this with internal assessment, external assessment, or here comes the student with a request for this kind of learning or that kind of certificate. What do I do with this? And then how do I process it through, to get it on their transcript? So CPlan, and I'll just go through this pretty quickly, and then we can get questions at the end. So CPlan works with all the campuses, and we started out by doing campus visits before the pandemic hit, but right now you can do a virtual visit with us, and we can walk you through whatever questions you have about CPL, and we can link you with other folks. We also have an opportunity for people to join the network. So if this is really a focus area for you and you want to be with a group of other campuses, and we've got 10 of the campuses in the network right now, where you want to kind of share stuff and work together. These are some of the areas we're working on. We've got a policy and procedure work group, And we're looking at some of those questions like fees, like we talked about earlier. We've got a certificates to credits work group. And that's really looking at how do you crosswalk, how do you crosswalk some of these industry certifications, whether we're looking at IT or something, healthcare or human services. And then we've got, we've in development with a web platform. And that's really a CPL web platform. We're at RFP stage now and trying to figure out a vendor. And then we'll be asking additional campuses beyond the network to help us in, with a soft launch in the spring, with really testing this out, and then with a hard launch in the fall. And that is really making it easy for any campus to do CPL because processes are automated. It's less, pencil and paper, phone call, email, that kind of thing. There's a platform that we can work through processes and we can have guides. So that's a big deal. And beyond CPlan, beyond the immediate network, CPlan is sponsoring or is facilitating a task force on transcript and coding, because we've got transcript procedures now about internal and external, but we're all doing it kind of differently, and we need to figure out the coding as well, because we need to be able to count, what's happening on each campus in terms of credit for prior learning, who's using what, what's successful, where are the problems. So that's going on this semester to help some with that procedure. And then there's what we call a CPL Academy, which was started even before CPlan was started a couple of years ago. And that was a D2L online 4-module course to give faculty some introduction to CPL and guiding students and creating assessments. So right now what we're doing with that is expanding to give more content on assessments, different and examples and rubrics for different internal and external assessments, for also guidelines for advising as well. And so we're adding this semester, working on adding content for faculty, but also for other groups, depending on what you do, what your stakeholder role is. Then we'll have a guide for you in terms of things to know and best practices and examples. So that's this spring also. And then in connection with, and that's something, both of the task force and the CPL Academy expansion, we've got representatives from all over the state in different roles. And then we're doing, in a collaboration with the All Learning Counts initiative, we're just starting up faculty convenings. And that's really to discuss curriculum, to look at different entry points for adults, particularly adults that are low income or in entry-level jobs, to really look at what are the different entry points. How might credit for prior learning as one entry point benefit? And so to begin with, is a curriculum discussion, but it's also beginning to build that infrastructure I talked earlier about, to make this kind of work more integral to what faculty or faculty work, but also to have that recognition, support, reward that we were talking about earlier. Now, we got 2 minutes left, and it looks like there are a lot of comments, but I wanted to show you really quickly, and we'll definitely share this PowerPoint, but there's a web page for us. There's an intake form for students to get them started, or potential or current students to direct them to the right place. We've got a listserv. We've got a newsletter. We've got webinars, one coming up on marketing CPL. And then we do faculty focused webinars with faculty presenting on, and that's at least once a semester. And this semester, we're going to do it on external assessments. And then we have a web page on joining the network. It's very simple. you can be at any, your campus can be at any stage of CPL, beginning, intermediate or advanced, however you want to look at it. You don't have to be an expert in CPL. We want everybody to join the network and support each other. It's very simple information form to fill out. And again, we're happy to meet with you virtually with your campus or your program or department and see how we can support you. So I know we have probably about a minute. Janice, is there something we have to, that we should answer right away? I can certainly
Yeah,
answer.
I don't see anything answered. The webinar will be available as well, the PowerPoints and the resources. So we'll make sure we send that out to everybody once it's posted on YouTube and our website. So we'll make sure of that. The other thing is just some comments about the workforce development entities and being part of this area. So I told Cassandra that we would get a hold of her. Mary Beth, I'll get her your name and such as well. But otherwise, a lot of good jobs and great information. Any last comments or thoughts? If I'll open it up for one last time here. Great presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. And if you have other questions or concerns,